your mix sucks. And there is a couple reasons why that could be. Alright, so this might be a bit exaggerated, but there's definitely a few things you could improve in your mix as a sample maker, beat maker, or whatever you do. It definitely applies to making music. So the first thing is sound selection, which might be a bit obvious, but sound selection basically defines how your sample sounds at the end. So I usually use high quality sound sources such as Contact. It doesn't really matter which plugin or one-shot you use as long as the quality is good. So this might be a shitty example, but making clothes, for instance. You want to make good clothes by using good fabrics, right? And the same thing basically applies to making music. You just want to like use good sounds. That's what it comes down to. So the next thing is basically sound designing your loop or sample, whatever you want to call it, by using the proper plugins. I'm gonna use this sample as an example. I'm not gonna go into detail how I made that sample because that covers like a whole video by itself, but go into like different parts and like show you how I cleaned up the mix by using proper plugins. The best example for this is probably this little piano right here. And what I mean by using proper plugins is like plugins that allow you to really form the sound the way you want it to. So for example, you could cut out the low end on the effect this echo basically puts out, or you could control the high and low end of your sample with this tape emulation right here. This does not apply to every plugin, but it's pretty useful to make your mix sound better because it gives you like so much option to form the sound by itself. So the next thing is basically EQing your stuff properly, and what I mean by that is there's like so many options you have with your EQ. And for example, we have this part right here. It's cool, but it's not clean enough for the mix. So what I did was cutting off the high end and fishing out the high frequencies that kind of hurt in your ear. That's like one of those things you could do individually with every sound in your project to make the overall sound cleaner and much better. Same thing for the piano we had in the beginning. I basically cut off the high and the low end to really make sure to only use the frequency range I really need in this specific project. And that's what I do for every sound within the project or the sample itself. And another thing I have learned over the past few years is Boxiness. Boxiness is basically killing your mix instantly, like almost instantly. And it's mostly in the area of like, I would say 150 and like 400 hertz. And I usually just EQ it out. There's like so much going on within this frequency range that could possibly make your project sound muddy and bad. In this example, we have this sample right here, which sounds good by itself, but there is definitely a thing we could improve, and it's basically removing the boxiness. And as you can see, there's like a lot of things going on within this frequency range, and you don't want to overdo it. You just want to like make it like really subtle. You can almost hear how the boxiness and like the muddiness of the mix goes away. It's like really subtle, but it definitely makes it sound better, especially when you apply it to every single sound within your mix. Now to my favorite part, working with the whole stereo spectrum and like working with mono and stereo. So listening to this project, you can definitely hear how there's like everything kind of panned in a specific way, and the science behind it is that you basically make sure that every sound has its own space within your mix. This also helps to prevent clashing and like making everything sound rumbly and boxy and whatnot. I also play with the mono knob because it gives you like the option to make it really be in its own lane, and I'm gonna show you what I mean by that. So this is like taking over the whole stereo spectrum, but it's kind of panned to the left. But when I turn up the mono knob, it's like really directed into this specific area, which makes it easier to prevent from clashing with other sounds. Depending on the project, I usually do this with every sound. Okay, last but not least, gluing everything together. And I usually do this by using a compressor. I usually use this compressor right here, but essentially it doesn't matter which compressor exactly you use. What a compressor basically does is like really gluing everything together. I know that's a shitty explanation, but that's as far as I can go. I also like to use tape emulation, and I usually put this on my master to like make sure that everything is glued together and nothing is like too dynamic and sticks out in a bad way in the mix, so it doesn't have like any peaks and whatnot. Right, so that's a couple things I've learned over the past few years. I almost use it on every sample, and I sometimes use it on beats too. Especially EQing things makes it so much easier to like control your whole mix and like really prevent sounds from clashing and taking over frequency ranges they are not supposed to take over. Same thing goes for the panning thing and using the mono knob. It really gives you like the whole control over every single sound and what it does in its own specific way. Anyway, I hope you learned something from this video. If you did, definitely make sure to subscribe and follow me on Instagram at CK1X. Otherwise, I'm gonna make your home mix muddy.